Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Aaron. I'm with Q's. We sponsored this session because we thought it was going to be the best attended one in the media and entertainment theater. And if I see these seats, I think I might be right. Um, the broadcast industry is about adaptation, right? They've survived the advent of the internet, social media, rise of digital, and they've truly adapted. Most broadcasters have become media houses, meaning they're telling stories not just on linear, but also on social media, also on the websites, on applications, you name it. Now, we from Q's, we're story-centric newsroom and automation system. We subscribe to that motion. We want to make that journey to being a media house as easy as possible and enable journalists to tell this story across all of these published points, right? We want to make telling stories as easy as possible. Now, these sessions felt incredibly pertinent with the state of the industry today, where we will hear answers of where is the business going while everything is shifting. How do we scale local without forgetting what local is all about? How do we tell stories across digital while not forgetting about our linear audiences, right? If anyone here has the right to have a very strong opinion on this, it's Perry Sook. So give it up for him and the amazing Deborah Norville. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you, Perry Sook, for doing this. And thank you all for being here. I agree with Aaron. I think this is going to be the best session of all of them here on this stage. Our mission, should we choose to accept it, and we did, is to look at the tectonic shift that's going on in television and broadcast television right now and try to discern where broadcast news in the future is going, whether it's a local station or a national network. New technologies, the erosion of the linear audience, and questions about trust and credibility have prompted a complete rethink of where broadcast news is headed. And right at the ground zero of all of that is this gentleman, Perry Sook, Chairman and CEO of Nextstar Media Group. Nextstar is the largest local television broadcaster in the country with 116 markets with stations reaching roughly 220 million Americans. And Nextstar's efforts to grow larger were stymied on Friday when a federal judge blocked its integration with Tegna. That's a $6.2 billion transaction that would leave Nextstar with 265 stations under its control in 44 states and DC. That would cover roughly 80% of the country. And the judge put the deal on hold until the lawsuit from DirecTV and 8 states' attorney general proceeds. So for now, the integration with Tegna is on hold. Perry, what can you tell us about what's next for this transaction in Nextstar?
Well, we can't really wander too far into the areas of jurisprudence, but suffice to say, we do plan to appeal the judge's order. That will happen very shortly. We think that when you look at the merits of the case and the reason and logic behind the merger, that the facts will prevail and that we will prevail. But obviously, we have to work our way through the court system. In the interim, we will operate Tegna, or Tegna will be operated as a subsidiary of Nextstar. There is a board that will govern the operations of Tegna. The board will appoint officers to administer the daily functions of Tegna, and will continue in that state, governed by the interim operating covenants, which were in place by and large during the pendency of the transaction, which, guardrails above which require board approval and things of that sort. So it's a little bit into the weeds. So, but the transaction closed over 4 weeks ago, and we own the assets.
March 28th, I think it was.
March 20th, actually. 20th. We own the assets. We will consolidate the financials. It's a part of our company. And obviously, the rest of this will play out in the courts as time goes on, but we have confidence that we'll prevail on the facts and the law.
Any idea what the time frame of this court process might be? What do your advisors tell you?
No, we're really not in control of the timetable. The judge will be, and the Ninth Circuit will be. So, we're anticipating that it will play out over a series of months here, and obviously we'll be very vigorous in our defense.
When the judge issued both the initial temporary restraining order and the injunction on Friday, he said the plaintiffs were likely to prevail on the merits of the antitrust grounds. And that was the aggregation of all of the stations, which is something that we're seeing throughout local media. You're already the biggest player in that market. Talk to me about why this isn't an antitrust issue.
Well, the idea that anyone, Nexstar included, would be a broadcast behemoth, to me, that term is kind of an oxymoron. When you think about who we compete against Google, we compete against Amazon, we compete against Netflix. These are multi-trillion-dollar companies. And even DirecTV, who is a part of the lawsuit, is twice the size of us. So the fact that we're the behemoth throwing our weight around in this marketplace, just doesn't really reflect the reality. If you look at DirecTV, they have a pattern of trying to weaken the companies they negotiate with. If you look at where the vast majority of the blackouts between broadcasters and MVPDs have taken place over the last several years, 83% of them have been with DirecTV.
During retrans negotiations?
Yes. And on the state AG side, there were 8 state attorneys general that filed against our transaction, all from blue states, Democratic states. 6 of those 8 AGs are running for election this year, either re-election or election to a higher office in their states. So it's pretty easy for me to see and to say that this was all political, attempting to fundraise and appeal to a base in an election year.
Right.
So, but having said that, we're here now, and we obviously have to defend ourselves and prevail in court.
So on the political note, would this market cap have been lifted if a different administration had been in power, if a different FCC chair had been at the head of the commission?
We've been pretty public in saying we would not have contemplated this transaction in the previous administration, where basically no transactions got done. So I think a byproduct of having a Republican administration that was pro-deregulation and in general pro-business was a catalyst for us to consider to go down this road and try and put these companies together. And the primary reason is to support local journalism, to see the local journalism in our markets survives against the existential threat of big tech and legacy media who are competing with us for eyeballs, for content, for people and advertisers. And anyone who thinks that's not our competitive set just is not aware of reality in the marketplace today.
And I want to get into that in just a moment, but you mentioned journalism. Journalism is expensive, and you receive retrans fees from the MVPDs. Anybody that gets fees, any business that gets fees wants to get the fees as high as they can. But the question is, who bears the cost of the fees? Should the MVPDs bear the cost? Should the consumers have it passed on to them? What do you think is the fair way for retrans to be accounted for?
Well, first of all, I don't bill the consumer. I don't set the rate with the consumer. I negotiate with the third party that is bundling my content with other content and then selling that to the consumer on a retail basis. So I would start with the fact that broadcast stations in aggregate generate 40% of the viewing in the bundle. Today, we receive less than 30% of the revenue from the bundle. So I think the pressure on the consumer is primarily from the larger bundle. I go into a distributor to talk about 1 or 2 channels in a marketplace. There are other companies that go in and talk about 15 and 20 channels, cable networks that they want to get cleared. Their check is much larger than ours in terms of what the expense is to the provider that ultimately gets passed on to the consumer. So I think I would look elsewhere and also look at the streaming alternatives that people are seeing out there right now that are putting pressure on that bundle. But I don't see broadcasting being the root cause, and we're certainly not the only cause.
Yeah, and to your point that broadcast stations are 40% of the viewing of the MVPD, that makes local news even more important because we've seen what's happening to primetime viewing on broadcast stations. So local news, live sports, that's really a magnet for viewers in local television. So it really strengthens your position.
Well, 100%. It is, first of all, it's the only IP that we own. Everything else we rent and, bundle up and pass on to the consumers as a viewing choice. And by the way, everything we have, everything that we produce is available free. So the thought that there is a harm to the consumer by what we do is hard for me to figure out, because we start with free.
Right.
If you choose to buy it in a bundle and you choose to pay for it and they choose to raise their rates, that's a decision a consumer can make, and many already have. But from my standpoint, we start with free. So I don't see a harm to the consumer when everything we have is given away.
Let's talk about that bigger threat, the Amazons, the Googles, the YouTubes, the big tech that's out there taking a lot of what was the traditional broadcast audience. How do you see that as an existential threat or an opportunity to rethink your business model?
Absolutely an existential threat, which I think can be dealt with through looking at the opportunity to evolve the business model. There is no question, whether you talk about Thursday night football, whether you talk about certain content that is exclusive now to streamers, and the fact that none of our content that is supplied by the networks is exclusive to us anymore. We used to pay for geographic exclusivity, market by market, and pay for the content. None of it's exclusive anymore. So inherently, it has less value to us. And you could draw a through line saying that we would have less value to the consumer because of all of the streaming options that are out there. But I think as it relates to local news, first of all, half of our ad support is in our local news broadcasts, greater than network, greater than sports, greater than everything else. This is our bread and butter. And as I said, it's the only IP we own. So the whole concept here for us is to preserve local journalism in this competitive threat. But I think we have to reimagine it differently. We have a general manager in Tampa, Florida, who I met with recently, who said, if you look at all of the 6 o'clock newses in Tampa, Florida, the aggregate audience that they reach on any given night is about 100,000 people. And that may sound good until you realize that Tampa is a market of 4.5 million people. So it is the largest aggregation of audience at that moment in time, but it still only reaches a fraction of the audience. And that's where we have to reimagine our business model. I think of our newsrooms as a content factory that needs to produce differentiated content. As I tell the story all the time, if I were in the furniture business and I only made one couch, I wouldn't be in business for very long,
Right.
with very much. So we've got to produce differentiated content at different times of the day to reach different audiences on different platforms. And so it's got to be, and we have to be as stewards of those newsrooms, agnostic as to what platform, what time, and what content. But the idea is to match up the content with the audience, reach the audience where they are, not where we wish they were. And there's nothing inherently wrong with the content, but we need to produce more of it. And you can do that by spending less duplication of resources, which again is part of our industrial logic. So if you produce differentiated content for different audiences on different platforms, I really don't care how we distribute it, but we need to distribute it everywhere and meet the customer where they are.
So tell me what it's like in a typical newsroom where maybe you have two stations in a marketplace and you are trying to feed the local noon, 4, 5, 6, whatever clock newses you've got, but you've also got a digital property that you are taking care of. What is the news operation doing on an hourly basis, both in terms of gathering the material, flipping it, and feeding it out to the consumer where they are, as you put it?
I think the most important thing is to eliminate the mindset that we produce for noon, 4, 6, and 10. We are a 24/7 operation, and it needs to be a flywheel of content. And maybe we have day part managers, that not the typical news director or assignment editor, all of that, but a day part manager. I'm on from 6 to noon. So what are the platforms available to me? What's the content that I have the capability to produce? And then how do I push that out? Automation can help with that a lot. AI is a tool that will enhance productivity for us. One of the first things the assignment manager does when he or she shows up for work every morning is make 20 calls to all the police departments in the marketplace to find out what happened last night. Well, AI, and Tegna has already developed a tool that some point we hope to be able to share across the Nexstar newsrooms as well, that AI will scrape those police blotters. So you go in, you press a button, you have a report, and then you decide where you want to deploy your resources, but you haven't spent 2 hours of the morning just gathering the information.
What are some of the other ways you're employing AI specifically as a tool in your newsrooms? And what are the guardrails that you are placing around it to make sure that there's always human oversight on the gathering of anything that's generated with AI?
We are developing a tool that right now that hasn't been deployed yet. It's still in test. And we were doing this in conjunction with Tegna, which again, one of the unintended consequences of the hold separate is some of this innovation is going to have to take a beat until we can actually use it to benefit our newsrooms and ultimately our viewers. But a tool that as a reporter is writing his or her story, will input, this seems pejorative. This seems unsubstantiated. Crime is down in DC. Crime is up in DC. Well, have you considered these facts? And,
So it's fact checking your writers as they're producing their content.
It's producing, it is providing the writer with additional information and context, which he or she can choose to put into their story. But, at News Nation, God bless her, we have one rhetorician who we hired that used to work at the Vatican who is trying to play bias cop with everything that goes out on a 24/7 cable network. This tool will be an incredible enhancement, and obviously we'll have to program it with the words that are important to journalism and what we do. But and it's just in the early stages of development. But the thought that we would have someone, as you're writing a story, it said, "Have you thought about it this way?" Could be a real, whether that influences the copy ultimately. Our job is to make sure that that is as unbiased a resource as possible. But I think it can be a great tool to enhance productivity, but also continue to make sure that we're delivering the most fact-based journalism out there.
How do you send the message to the 116 markets where you currently have stations, to those news consumers, that you're a place to turn for news? Because we've seen people turning away from television, and I'll pop up and get our stats up there. This one right here, news consumption dropping, and we see that only 32% of the audience, this is from the Pew Center, is turning to television for their news and information. 56% are going to digital sources. That's your problem right there. And I don't care how many stations you've got. Mm-hmm. You got to convince them to come to you and not go to the guy who put the information on the phone in the pocket.
I don't think it's a zero-sum game, Deborah. I think that we have to think about producing content for a vertical device as opposed to a horizontal device, meaning a phone versus a laptop or a big screen. We're working in earnest to do that as well. I also think that I had a conversation with someone last night who said, I watch a lot of News Nation, but I don't necessarily watch the linear channel. I search for the subjects that interest me and then I watch those clips. And that's okay. I don't think that you have to watch a program linearly to get the full impact of it. And that's how we have to reimagine what we do in terms of pushing information and content out locally. The secret sauce we have is local, right? Our journalists live in the communities upon which they report. Our anchors are seen at the grocery store, at the church, wherever people gather, and there's that connection and believe. Well, they're like me because they live where I live, and we've invested. Our company has invested billions of dollars in local journalism and cementing, but that's really our secret sauce. I believe that our local journalism is the last bastion of local journalism when you look at the diminution of newspapers and radio and all that's happened, and that an independent local press is good for the democracy. And so this is an existential battle, but we're really fighting for the future of local journalism and preserving it so that we're not getting our news from a chatbot. We're not getting our news from unknown origin and unknown political persuasion. And so that's really what this is all about for us.
And it's really all about trust. If local journalism is the last bastion of a free and independent press, that free and independent press has to be trusted. And this next slide is really depressing. It's a percent of adults, this is again from the Pew Center, who said they have a lot or some trust in the information they get from local news, national news, and social media. And it has dropped considerably from 2016 when this was first collected. 14%, still local news is number one. Local news, 70% do trust local news, but it's dropped down and social media is going up. And it will be higher the next time, I'm sure, this survey is taken. When you see this statistic, what does that tell you as a manager of news operations that you guys need to be doing?
Well, I think it says that we need to make sure that our content is part of the social media experience and conversation, that we reach people with that content. And, with any good luck or good fortune, we can loop them back into some of our flywheel.
And that it's branded so that they know
Right.
that information that they saw on their Instagram feed came from the Next Star station in your city.
That's right. So I think that's listen, it's this is over 10 years, and so there's been a drop in perception according to this study for local news, much greater for national, and social media has gone up 3 points. So it's all relative value, but there's no mistaking the trend line. So we have to take that, we cannot take that for granted, that people will trust us because we're local. We need to earn that every day, and that means we just need to be even more vigilant and vigorous around our reporting and our reporting standards.
Let's talk about station concentration. You are the largest holder of broadcast stations, and it all started for you, your journey in particular, with one station in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and now you have grown to be the biggest broadcaster in the country. Stepping aside from the journalism conversation that we're having right now, how does that responsibility weigh on you personally, that you are the man at the top of a company that has such enormous influence nationwide?
Well, first of all, we have 13,000 employees that depend on this company to make a living for themselves and their families, and I take that very seriously. Our local journalism and our local content is our North Star. It's what the company was built on. Yes, we created News Nation, but that's because we had a foundation of local content. We bought the CW because it was good. We could make it better, and that would be better for our local stations. So everything this company does is through a local lens. And I tell people all the time, we're in the least sexy but most sticky part of the media ecosystem because of that local connection. And that's what the company was founded on, built on, and will continue to be built on. And if you look at the amount of local content we do versus the stations that we've acquired, how much they were doing, we're the Tribune stations. We increased by over 20,000 hours a year the amount of local content they were doing. If you go back to in the history of time, the company will be 30 years old in less than 2 months, and we've increased the amount of local content by almost 30% over what those stations were doing at the time of acquisition. We employ more local journalists in the United States than any other news organization on the face of the earth, and so we take that responsibility seriously. But it's also good business. It's our stock and trade. It's our number one advertiser supported category. And so people that think we would do anything to diminish what we have doesn't understand what the company's all about.
But you hear the critics. You hear the critics who say when there's so much concentration of stations in one ownership's hands, by definition, you are eliminating the number of points of view that can be shared. In other words, they fear that if you own two stations and assuming the Tegna thing is ultimately allowed to go forward, you could have as many as three in some big four markets.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real concern out there that having one owner of those three stations is going to eliminate the amount of variety of points of view, the variety of stories that'll be covered. How do you address that concern?
I think it's a false dichotomy. I think it's a false choice. People assume that the status quo, nothing will change. If we maintain the status quo, newsrooms will close. And I don't close newsrooms. I just move the address and move them into one building. So I pay to heat and cool one facility. I may have one administrative staff, one technical support staff with two different studios, two sets of reporters, two anchors. And as I was mentioned to you earlier, we, rather than sending two reporters and two photographers and two company vehicles to cover the mayor's press conference and they stand next to each other in the press pool, we can send one there to get that footage, let each team, each station, each identity, each news product determine how they want to use that footage. But then that other reporter and photographer can go and report on something else, which is again the leveraging our resources
Yeah.
so that we can produce more local news, which is what I talked about earlier. We need to be doing more news, more differentiated content at different times of the day for different platforms.
Okay, as you say that, I'm literally sitting here thinking and watching the mayor standing there at the podium and all the cameras are lined up. What if the mayor's office put a feed out that every broadcast station, every radio station, every citizen of XYZ town could get? Would that not be something that would, as journalists, we care about the information getting out to the people. As a station owner, you want to do it in the most efficient way possible. But as a broadcast news operation that wants to provide context and understanding to that press conference, wouldn't that be a great solution for the economy of resources that you're talking about?
Well, take it one step further. If we on our digital and streaming platforms, for those that were interested in that in the here and now, we send it out live. We
Yeah.
don't have to capture it, repackage it, and put it on the 6 o'clock news. We could send it out live. But you're right; it would enable us then. You capture the content. That's one less step that you have to do, and then the stations can interpret it and package it the way they think suits their audience the best. But there's no reason we can't stream that live, across one of our conduits to those that really care about it.
Okay, you, Gray, and Sinclair collectively are the three biggest broadcasters in America. What if the three companies got together and in the markets where you operate, and in most of those cities you're operating side by side with one another, you actually wired up some of the local important agencies so that that information could be out? Is that even feasible?
Sure, it's possible. Yeah, I think so. Listen, we don't compete with each other. I mean, that's incidental contact. We compete with Google, Amazon, Netflix, Meta. I mean, all of these are our competitors, and anyone that doesn't see the slow melt of the ice cube. That's why we need consolidation to build stronger companies that can survive. We need the ability to use technology to expand our ability to produce more local content, but there's no reason that it couldn't be cooperative efforts as well. If I owned all the TV stations in any particular market, let's medium size or larger market, that would control approximately 15% of the ad revenue in that marketplace. That's how big tech is. Tech has grown. The ocean has surrounded the island in terms of the influence and dollars and where they're being spent. And so I go back to what I said earlier, a broadcast behemoth is kind of an oxymoron as far as I'm concerned. We're trying to survive and make sure local journalism survives, for my kids and my grandkids.
And what happens to the other broadcast entities out there? If this tech monster is so big over here and consuming so much of the local ad dollars as it currently is, how many broadcast entities can remain in operation going forward? I think I've heard you quoted as saying you think there will only be two publicly traded companies that investors will care about at some point in the future.
Well, I think, if you look at the legacy industry, it is by all accounts mature. So mature industries consolidate. And yeah, I think there'll be two companies, maybe three, of substance, of size that will remain in this marketplace. And I'd much rather have three healthy companies rather than one healthy company or two healthy companies and a bunch that are financially struggling. Make no mistake about it, there are many companies in both television and radio that are financially struggling right now.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of time until that plays out. But that's, again, we want to be a healthy company. We want to be a strong company. This is the only part of the media ecosystem that has a federally mandated cap on growth. Big tech doesn't have it. Cable networks don't have it. MVPDs don't have it. But there's a federally mandated governor on just how big we can get, which is a relic of a bygone era that is irrelevant, in this day and age. And I think the FCC has recognized that. obviously made waivers to some of those antiquated regulations to allow our transaction to move forward because they saw the public interest. And I think if you read the FCC's filings in our grant, you can see that they agreed with the premise. They understood the presence and premise. And Chairman Carr, since he was a commissioner, has been saying these rules are outdated. They have got to go, or there's not going to be an industry left to regulate. And I think he gets it. He called it a break glass moment. And we agree, and I think it'll be a matter of time before legislatively the cap is removed, or from a regulatory perspective, and local ownership rules continue to be modernized. In the meantime, it's well within the FCC's purview to grant waivers. Everybody talks about the thoroughness of the review. I look at just what we submitted to the DOJ. 7.1 million pages of documents that we submitted in response to their second request. It was over 2.1 million actual documents. So I think the record is very robust, and both agencies independently, but ultimately agreed that the transaction had merit to move forward. It was a benefit to consumers, and we think that's ultimately what will prevail in the jurisprudence part of this process.
We'll see that one play out in court. You mentioned the chairman. We're sitting here talking about journalism, and Chairman Carr has been somewhat unsupportive of journalists and journalism in some of his comments. How do you, as someone who supports so many thousands of journalists as local reporters, square that with the idea that, you had to get the commission to agree to the waiver?
Well, I think there is the simple fact that, we employ about 6,000 journalists, and they're across 44 states, as you mentioned, actually 40 states today without the benefit of Tegna. And we don't tell any of those, I don't tell any of those newsrooms what to do. Their mandate is to serve their community to the best of their ability. And what may be the norm for Burlington, Vermont may be different in San Diego, California, may be different here in Las Vegas, and different in Tampa, Florida. And so nobody goes home to watch a Nexstar station. They go home to watch News 8 now in Las Vegas. They go to watch KTLA 5 in Los Angeles. And so it's that local brand and the obligation to serve the local community and not serve any other agenda. And I think you can go look at all of the independent rating agencies, Ad Fontes, NewsGuard, any of those, and they recognize not only is News Nation high in original reporting and absent bias right on the middle. It's in month after month, study after study, but same for our local stations. They are unbiased. And I think that's, the only way you can be pure in this is to have that be your North Star. And so that's what we have attempted to do with our company. I told people the
But
night
you've got a chairman who has been unsupportive of journalism and specifically critical of journalists. And you employ journalists who, as you just stated, work so hard to report unbiased and truthful information.
I think that obviously there is a concept that legacy media organizations, some of whom you used to work for, and are seen as left biased. And I don't think that is unsubstantiated. I told people the day we not launched News Nation, I said, by being in the center, we will be to the right of the established media organization. So they will see us to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that article's already written. And sure enough, it came out the day after we launched. Almost 4.5 years ago. So from our perspective, our responsibility is to our community, and that's where we have to be grounded and have to be true to ourselves. And I, listen, I lobby in Washington. I've been doing it for years. I've been doing it on ATSC 3.0. I've been doing it on integrated regulations. I lobbied for our deal, as talked to senators, folks at the House of Representatives, regulators, folks at the White House, anyone who would listen on all of these, because, I started this company. I didn't put my name on the door, but I put Nexstar on the door, and I'm the third largest shareholder. This is my family's net worth tied up in this company. I care deeply about the company, the industry, and the industry doing well. And I'm not the canary in the coal mine, but I think I'm just calling the facts as they are. This local journalism is under threat, and without making moves to modernize the regulations, modernize the way we think about what we do every day, it's going to be a very inelegant decline that no one's going to like to be a part of, and no one's going to like the end state either.
So let's talk about what the revenue model looks like for journalism, broadcast news going forward in the next 5 years, say. We don't want to be reading the obituary of broadcast news 5 years from now, and you certainly don't. Your passion is obvious. What's the revenue model to sustain broadcast news in a way that communities can feel that their local stations are giving them the news they need to be informed citizens of that community? What does the revenue model look like?
Well,
You've got the big tech guys taking a lot of your ad dollars.
Correct. I mean, it's the current model today is distribution revenue, that our signals available for free, just like water in a public drinking fountain. But if you buy your water in one of these, you pay for it. And so the same with MVPDs, they basically package us up with other offerings and put them out into the marketplace. So I think achieving our fair share of value into the bundle vis-a-vis viewership and value from the bundle, that should at least be a fair trade. I would think, given that all of our content—
Can you make enough on that to sustain?
Well, with the decline in the pay TV universe and people going to streaming models, we need to be paid to be a part of every one of those streaming models. Some of those are controlled by legacy media companies that, are not apt to share at this point in time. So through negotiation, I think we have to prove that an end-to-end solution that is fair and equitable for all participants in the value chain is the only way to sustain the business long term. I talked about ad support. Ad support. Our local news contributes over 50% of our total ad revenue for the company, and we have to make sure that we are monetizing. When someone says, "I only watch you on YouTube," well, we're starting now to monetize with that. So we need to monetize on every platform. Advertising. We have to have a technology-enabled solution for buying advertising and placing it, so that linear television isn't different than every other media out there, right? That is sold on impressions. We're still selling on demos and geography and all of that. And that needs to evolve, because if we make it hard to do business with us, people have other options. We're seeing they're voting with their feet right now. So we've got to invest in the technology, improve measurement, and make sure we, are validating our worth. But again, I think it starts with the content factory. We have to continue to develop differentiated content for differentiated platforms. And if it is of value, I would like to think there will be value received.
And where does NextGen TV ATS3 C3 fit into that?
Well, we're obviously huge proponents. We have as much spectrum as anybody else in the country that potentially is available for monetization through high-speed data transmission. We can do additional fast channels, additional diginet channels that could be of special interest, where you're super serving certain groups. And maybe the only way you sell that is like podcasts. You have to aggregate a bunch of them to take them to market. But it opens up possibilities for us with the ancillary spectrum for high-speed data transmission, for a backup GPS system for the country. There's a lot of public service, a lot of public benefit that can come from this transition to ATSC 3.0. And, we're out there banging the drum for it to happen as soon as possible.
What kind of revenue do you project that could be bringing in? And can you pledge to dedicate some of that revenue to support your journalism operations?
Well, in terms of what it's worth, I've said that I think that 5 to 10 years from now, we'll be generating as much revenue from data transmission or ancillary rental and use of our spectrum that we get from retrans today, so retrans for our company is approximately a $3 billion number. So even maybe if I'm half right, I mean, that's the kind of number you could be looking at. And yes, I mean, that the reason to do that is to be able to, if ad revenue continues to splinter and distribution revenue continues to decline, this is the only place we can go to be able to continue to invest in local journalism, which is our only product.
Let's go back to the journalism and the journalist who works in your newsrooms around the country. Many of them work as one-man bands. There was a gentleman at an earlier panel I was sitting in on. He was a first job reporter from Macon, Georgia, and he was asking the panel, what can he do to be safe when he goes out there? Concern any one-man band or MMJ has. The salaries are pretty small for that initial reporter, and even the longer time journalist. Compensation is not what it used to be. What do you say to someone who is considering a career in broadcast news, or perhaps some of these people sitting here currently have careers in broadcast news and are concerned about their financial well-being because salaries have become so diminished in most local newsrooms?
Well, I would perhaps take issue with that maybe some of the salaries at the very top of the newsroom or the news industry have declined. You know, the $15 million a year morning show host is now maybe half that or less than half.
Or retired.
Yeah. But I would also say that, we have addressed because, if you're competing with McDonald's for local journalism talent, or Oilfield Services talent in Midland, Texas, you're going to lose if you're not paying competitive. So our salaries have gone up, and I'm sure everyone that works for me would say not enough. But this is still a calling, right? It is still an opportunity, and if you believe, as I do, that a free and independent press is essential to this republic, to this nation, and the bedrock of it is now local broadcast journalism, then that's a calling. That's something that someone would want to be a part of. Now, I was a one-man band. Now we now call them MMJs, right? My son is an MMJ in New York City, and he gets great satisfaction out of the stories he tells. And I think if you have any desire or intent to tell stories and have an impact in a local marketplace, because we can be difference makers. To me, that would be the reason to get into the business. And in our company, particularly, we have tried to build it so that if you start in San Angelo, Texas, and your next move is to Austin, and your next move is to Dallas, and your next move is to the cable network
Sure.
that is national, that you can achieve all of your career aspirations, perhaps without having to leave the company. And so you build that seniority, you build your 401k, you build all of the other things that we offer. And so that's, again, we're trying to build an ecosystem where we can bring people through their career ladder without them having to jump ship.
We're having this conversation from the perspective of broadcasters who've been in the business for a long time. What do you wish the public knew about broadcast journalism that might not be as top of mind that it should be? What do you wish your audience was more mindful of?
Well, I don't know that the audience really cares about our problems as much as they do their problems, and so we need to be forward-looking and trying to address and solve their concerns and problems.
I didn't mean necessarily the problems, maybe about the product that you put out, your news product.
I don't really know how to answer that in terms of what we wish the audience. I think that certainly in Washington, I have found that there is not a real understanding of what we do and the benefit we bring. I think the folks in the local markets get it, because if we're doing a coat drive in Buffalo for kids without coats, we're doing a back to school backpack for underprivileged kids. People see that on the air, and I don't think that we, Nexstar, or the industry has done necessarily the best job of aggregating and showcasing our public service beyond the local news that we do in our local marketplaces.
Well, that's why the NAB has its Service to America Awards. Nexstar is often recognized at those things. And I think this year it is June the 9th in Washington, D.C., a wonderful showcase of exactly those kinds of service-oriented things. I'm going to ask you the last question, and I think it's a big one. If we're standing here 10 years from now and local broadcast journalism has survived and thrived, what made that possible? And for those stations where it isn't, what would you predict they would have done wrong?
I think survival will require an upending of the status quo. And I think for those that are not willing to take those steps, and not everything will work the first time out, we need to fail fast and move forward. But I think for those that take a different view of what our essential mission is, I tell people all the time, Nexstar does two things. We produce local content and we help local businesses sell stuff. It's a reason to exist, commercial reason to exist. Mission statement to exist is produce local content. And so it's not much more complicated than that. And I think if you keep your focus on the audience and the advertiser, everything else will take care of itself. And, we don't need to get all caught up in, well, is this going on a streaming or a fast channel or a connected TV? It needs to go everywhere. We need to do all of that and then more in order to continue to survive and prosper. I have a great faith and belief in what we do. I spent $15 billion putting this company together. And so I hope, give it more than lip service. Now, there will always be critics, and could we always do things better at the local level? Do we make mistakes? 100%. But I do believe in our essential mission and that we are becoming unique in the only one that represents the local markets and the local consumer. And again, from a local perspective, that's our North Star. And I think that's where everyone has to focus, in not just that, well, we have stations that are kind of barker channels for our other business interests, which, by the way, is part of the big tech problem as well. They'll buy content at a loss, but it props up other businesses, whether it's a Prime membership or whatever. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why we're losing, right? And so I think, can only be the best at local. And I think that has to be, the North Star that we focus on, and where all of our efforts have to go in my part of the industry. And I think good things will come from that. But we have to rethink the way we do it in order to survive, because you're seeing smaller companies cancel newscasts. You're seeing some mid-sized and larger companies cancel newscasts. I can tell you that if you're not number one or number two in a local market, your news operation is probably losing money.
Well, a good example of that was Toledo, when Sinclair came in and they shut down the local news operation. They put in their hubbed national news program. And I actually was curious, based on our conversation coming up, was there a hue and cry? Was there a lot of distress in Toledo when that third station canceled its local news?
Well, don't
Crickets.
underestimate the intelligence of the consumer. In that particular instance, I think the consumer voted with their feet
They'd already left.
and went elsewhere. Those that were left. Yeah, those things are never done, in my view, to create growth in audience. They're to try and maintain some level of content at the lowest possible cost. And you can't be critical of that, right? Because if you're trying to do something, otherwise, well, just put in another sitcom. My first company had 2 stations, and neither one of them had local news. They were very successful. We had Seinfeld, we had Home Improvement. And I said, in Nextstar, it has to be about local content, because that's the only thing that makes us unique. And so that's been the focus of the company for 30 years.
30 years, 145 stations, possibly more to come. Perry Sook, this is a very interesting time in your company's history, and we are so grateful to you spending some time with us today to talk about it.
Thanks, Deborah. Appreciate being here.
Thank you, sir.